Beautiful, absolutely perfect, absolutely disgusting. The only aim for today is to get this lump into this engine bay. But there wasn't enough. Hello and welcome to this video. I'm Marcus Hayes, and in this video I'm going to be turning my attention back to focusing on my latest project, Heidi, my hearing aid beige model Mk2 Escort. Now unfortunately today is one of them days where 1 minute it's bright and sunny and the next minute it's raining like it is now. Seeing as it is raining, I'm going to turn my attention to Heidi's engine, which I can crack on with here inside my dad's garage. Now since the last time you saw this on the channel, I have given the cylinder head another repaint. I literally just scotched up all the black areas, masked up all the springs and stuff like that, masked up the block and the gasket faces again, and gave it a coat of the BODICRAFT gloss black. My main focus right now is to get Heidi's engine into her engine bay, which should have happened by now if it wasn't for me needing to take a few steps backwards when I found that the valve stem seals were perished. I'm still waiting for a couple of bits to come through the post, which I need before I can get the engine fitted, but in the meantime I can make a start with getting this engine looking more like an engine again. And the first things going back onto the lump are the push rods and the rocker shaft assembly. The push rods have been kept in this piece of cardboard to make sure I could put them back in the same holes that they came out of. When the engine's running, the camshaft in the bottom end pushes the push rods up and down, which then move these rockers, which in turn open the valves. Refitting the rocker shaft assembly is very simple. I just laid it in place and gradually done the bolts up, at first by hand, then with a spanner, and then once I'd made sure that everything was located correctly on the push rods and the valves, it was time to torque the bolts up. According to the Haynes manual, the bolts needed to be between 17 and 22 foot-pounds, and I decided to do them up to 22. Alright, so the next obvious thing to fit would be the rocker cover, and before I fit that I'm actually going to cover all of this with some oil just in case the rocker cover doesn't have to come back off again before we start it. But before I do that, I want to roughly set the ignition timing. Now I've refitted this front pulley because there's a notch on it that lines up with these marks here, which is to do with the ignition timing. I've also now bolted the clamp down properly for the distributor, but I've loosened this bolt here, and with this loose, even though this clamp is attached to the block, this is now able to freely spin, and that is basically how you adjust the ignition timing, which when it's running you do with a timing light to get it super accurate, but whilst the rocker cover's off it means I can roughly set it to where it needs to be. Now I've put the rotor arm back on here, and I've got the dizzy cap over here, and basically I want to make sure that when this engine is at TDC, or top dead centre, on cylinder 1, and what I mean by that is that when the piston is at the top of the bore whilst the engine's on its compression stroke, so that means that when both valves are closed, so you know both of these valves will be up, and the piston is at the top of the bore, that's TDC on cylinder 1. Piston 1 will obviously come back to the top of the bore again on the exhaust stroke, and that's when you'll have one valve closed and one valve open. So proper TDC on the compression stroke is when piston number 1 is at the top of the bore and both of these valves are closed. Essentially both of these valves will be up. So if I just get a spanner and turn the engine clockwise, you'll see that the rotor arm goes anti-clockwise. So the firing order on the dizzy cap is this way. So when we're at top dead centre, we want the rotor arm pointing to what will be number 1, and then we need to put the other leads in the correct order going this way. And if we look in the Haynes manual, the firing order of a crossflow is 1, 2, 4, 3. So for example, if this was now facing at number 1, we'll put the dizzy cap on in a minute and figure it out. The next one will be 2, then the next one will be 4, and then the next one will be 3. 1, 2, 4, 3. Simple as that. Now to make this easier in terms of getting its TDC, I can actually just line up the notch on this pulley with these marks, They're all sort of filled in with paint. I might have to look in the Haynes manual to figure out which one's which, but we turn this pulley round. So yeah, that definitely looks like a purposeful notch in the pulley. I think that second one down, where it's basically lined up with now, is 0 or TDC. Actually, I think this one here says TDC. Yeah, so that would probably be TDC. That will probably be 4 degrees before. That might be 6 or 8, and that might be 10 or 12. That kind of looks like a 12 actually. So yeah, I think having this notch lined up with that, we're at TDC. And if I put my screwdriver in here, if I go backwards or forwards, the screwdriver should go down, which it does. That's TDC, and forwards, and the screwdriver goes down. So I'm pretty sure there we're at TDC, and as you can see, both of the springs are not compressed, so both of the valves are closed. So yeah, I'm confident that we're at TDC with the compression stroke of cylinder 1. So if we put the Dizzy cap on, you can see that at the moment it's pointing in between 2. So if we look here, this one is about here on the Dizzy body. So I can take my cap off, and because this is loose, I can rotate the distributor, which won't alter where the engine is until this rotor arm is touching where my finger is. Alright, and that's actually a good spot because it means this rusty vacuum thing is out of sight, you know, when the engine's in the car. So I'm going to nip this clamp back up now with my 3/8 spanner, because this engine isn't metric. In fact, when it's properly timed up, it will need to be somewhere before TDC, about 10 or 12 degrees, I believe. So I may as well actually set the engine to that mark there, which looks like it says 12 degrees before TDC. And then I'll twist this Dizzy back a little bit so that the rotor arm points at where that spark plug lead will be, and then do the clamp up. So now the Dizzy won't move, and that rotor arm is pointing at this one, so this one becomes number 1. And just to keep it all out of the way whilst I carry on fitting the rocker cover and stuff, I'm just going to mark it with this electrical tape, so we know that that's number 1, and then the rest we can work out by following the firing order. I poured some oil all over the rocker shaft assembly to make sure there was something in the top end, and then I refitted Heidi's beautiful beige rocker cover. Next to go on was the thermostat housing, which I actually lacquered after John very kindly polished it for me. Then I fitted the spark plugs and hooked up number 1 lead that we marked earlier. Then with a firing order of 1, 2, 4, 3, we know this is 1, this is 2, this is 4, and this is 3. Once all the other HT leads were pushed onto their spark plugs, I decided to mark the Dizzy and the Dizzy cap where cylinder 1 is. I am so happy that I've now got some clips to hold the brake line onto the bulkhead here, and I've been able to utilise the little nails or whatever they are that were in the bulkhead originally. So yeah, really happy that I haven't had to drill holes and use these P-clips. And loads of you guys were begging me not to drill unnecessary holes in the bulkhead, and these clips were actually very kindly sent to me by a subscriber and a patron actually called Andrew Tompkinson. And we actually went to visit Andrew recently, and he showed us around his friend's Cosy powered Mk2 Escort. Go and check that video out if you haven't already. But yeah, massive thanks to you, Andrew, for yet again sending me some bits that I need. I really, really appreciate it. I've also now attached this bracket for the windscreen washer bottle to the inner wing. I actually painted this myself with the gloss black 2-pack spray cans from my friends at BODICRAFT in Watford. Awesome finish with those spray cans. I do still need to put a nut on the back of the stud that's here, that's going through to the inner wing, because yeah, the front suspension leg is actually in the way of me doing that. Now there is one other thing that was sent to me recently by a subscriber. This brand new bonnet release cable and a brand new bonnet release handle, and those bits were sent to me by a guy called Derek Bain, so massive thanks to you if you're watching. I've got this cable here that actually came with Heidi, and I've got the handle. I'll be able to use that pin and clip to use these new bits, and I was actually going to try and just put some like heat shrink around this, because the only thing wrong with this really is that the outer sheath is damaged. Even that grommet is still usable. But yep, really happy that Derek sent me these bits that I can use instead. I'll just quickly show you one of the pieces that I picked up from Carlo's today. This is of course Heidi's flywheel, which has now been fully skimmed. If you've been watching my videos, you'll know that I basically failed to get 2 of the alignment dowels out. 1 came out and the other 2 snapped off. So Carlo needed to remove the 2 snapped ones before he could skim it. And the way he did it was, where I'd successfully removed one of the dowels, he was able to drill through right to the other side. You'll see that it's got 3 holes now, so he was able to drill through one of them, and then he was able to put this flywheel on this sort of rotating turntable that he's got, that's got, you know, measurements of degrees. And because he knew that the other 2 dowels were exactly 120 degrees around from the one that he was able to drill through, because thankfully I was able to get one of them out, then he was able to use that tool to turn the flywheel exactly 120 degrees and then drill through from this side, and then 120 degrees again and drill through from this side, and then he was able to tap the dowels out, you know, with a punch. So that meant that I could get the other 2 dowels out, and yeah, now I've got a fully skimmed flywheel. I do have a brand new set of dowels over here tied to the engine so that I wouldn't lose them, and I have actually now decided to fit this flywheel. Some people were saying to me that this was a 1600 flywheel, although I'm reading in a lot of places that all Crossflows had the same weight flywheel. This is actually 10 kilos exactly, and at least one person that I've been speaking to who's got a 1300 flywheel for sale said that theirs weighs 10 kilos. So I'm guessing at least some 1300s were fitted with 10 kilo flywheels from the factory, and ultimately Heidi's not about the speed, so I don't think it's going to matter. And if I fit this one, at least I know that it's freshly skimmed and absolutely perfect. It's worth noting as well that when Carlo skims flywheels, he actually bolts the flywheel to his lathe from the hub, you know, where it bolts to the crank, so that whilst he's skimming it, he's also kind of taking out any slight sort of imbalance in terms of how straight it is, which is awesome. So yeah, that's ready to go on. I did also pick up the adjustable slave cylinder rod from Carlo today for Esther, my Mk2 Escort, but I'll talk about that when I'm working on her next. But yeah, massive thanks to Carlo for doing these jobs for me. I will leave all his links in the description for any of you guys that are in or around Uxbridge that need a precision engineer. And just like that, it's the next day. After I turned the camera off yesterday, I gave Heidi's 4-speed gearbox a bit of a clean. This thing was literally covered in a thick layer of dirt and grease. It was absolutely disgusting. There was even a load of grease and dirt inside the bell housing. So yeah, what I thought was going to be a quick jet wash turned out to be an absolute mission. It's not perfect, but it'll do. It's going to be under the car. It won't be seen anyway. Now, one thing I should have done yesterday, but I've actually only done today, is given this dust shield a very quick key up, and I'm going to paint this black. So far, I've just given it a coat of the Kent Europe epoxy primer, and I just hope that I'm able to fit that after I fit the flywheel, because I don't want to wait for that to dry before I crack on with getting Heidi's engine ready to fit, because the only aim for today is to get this lump and this gearbox into this engine bay, which is at least possible now thanks to a parcel I got through the post yesterday from my friends at BURTON Power. And said parcel consisted of a brand new set of flywheel bolts, because I accidentally put the old flywheel bolts in with the zinc plating stuff, and apparently zinc plating can make bolts brittle. And yeah, these flywheel bolts are very cheap from BURTON Power, so I decided to grab a new set. But I've also got a brand new spigot bearing to go in the end of the crank there. May as well change it whilst I'm here, because again, this is very, very cheap. And the other thing I bought from BURTON Power is this clutch release bearing, which is the correct one for these 4-speed, I think they're called Type 2 gearboxes. And yeah, the clutch arm is over there. I heard about a different method to remove the spigot bearing, which involves my favourite tool and a chisel. Once I've destroyed the inner part of the bearing, I was able to get that out, closely followed by the needle bearings themselves. Then the idea is to cut a slot in the outer part of the bearing and try and fold it in on itself, as illustrated here. Eventually I did manage to get the rest of the bearing out, and then I decided to clean out the hole with a wire brush and a drill and some brake cleaner. I put some grease on the outside of the new bearing and then tapped it in to get it started before fully tapping it home with my drift tool. Next to go on was my freshly refaced flywheel. Then I put some thread lock on my brand new bolts and threaded them in by hand. I grabbed my brand new dowels and put some thread lock on them before tapping them home with my persuader. And then I put a bar and socket on the front crank pulley so that I could torque up the flywheel bolts to 56 foot-pounds. I used the Kent brake cleaner to thoroughly clean the flywheel and both pieces of the clutch, but unfortunately my clutch alignment tool wouldn't fit. I attached the clutch to the flywheel, put thread lock on the bolts before threading them into the flywheel, but leaving them finger tight at this stage. I was going to need to align the clutch by eye by looking at the position of the friction plate and making sure it was even all the way round. I kept tapping the friction plate in on whatever side it looked like it was protruding more, and after a lot of trial and error, it looked like it was dead central. We'll find out for sure later on when I try and fit the gearbox, but for now, I just torqued up the clutch bolts to 17 foot-pounds. Alright, well that turned into way more of a mission than I was expecting. The spigot bearing was a nightmare. Definitely going to use the bread or the grease method in future. I think this thing is now as ready as it needs to be to go in the engine bay. Normally I would hook up the engine and the gearbox and put them in together, but this time I'm not going to do that. So let me explain why. First of all, with it being a normal 4-speed gearbox, there's way more clearance on the gearbox tunnel, which means there shouldn't be any issue with me fitting the gearbox after the engine's already in. And if I fit the engine in on its own, I'm not going to even need to jack this car up. I'll be able to lower the engine onto the cross member, really easily. When you put the gearbox and the engine in together, you've got to sort of have the car up higher and you've got to have the engine and gearbox going in like this, and there's way more chance of you scratching paint in the engine bay and stuff. And I'm here on my own. I also don't trust the weather. I don't want it to start raining halfway through and then me have to roll the car back into the garage. So it makes sense for me to chuck the engine in on its own. Don't need to jack the car up, don't need to do anything. I can literally just lower the engine into the engine bay. I gave the dust guard a coat of the Kent Europe satin black paint. Will it fit with the flywheel already fitted? Who knows? It was time to get the engine off of the engine stand, so I hooked it up to the hoist. I used a couple of head studs on the exhaust side and the fuel pump on the inlet side. I used a microfiber to protect the paint on the rocker cover, and with the engine hoisted, I could pull off the stand, remove the bracket and refit the engine mount. Time for the moment of truth. Will the gearbox slide on? Happy days. I adjusted the bonnet prop to give me a little bit more space to work with, but it was clear that there wasn't enough. So I adjusted the straps and put them round the engine mounts instead, and then very slowly but surely lowered Heidi's engine into her engine bay without chipping any of the paint, thankfully. Then, with the hoist disconnected and pulled away, I could breathe a sigh of relief. Alright, the lump is in the bay and look how tiny it looks in there. Oh my days. One thing I have just noticed, I'm not going to be able to get my strap back from around the engine mounts. I could probably jack up one side at a time and unhook it, but I'm probably just going to end up cutting it, but I'll leave it on there for now. The engine is currently leaning on the cross member with the back of the sump. I've put a microfiber cloth in there just to stop the paint getting damaged on the sump and the cross member. But yeah, big moment for any project. The lump is in the bay. I'm definitely going to run out of light relatively soon, but I do want to throw this gearbox in before I leave here today. I got Heidi up in the air and then greased up her new clutch release bearing before fitting it onto the clutch fork. Well, that was the plan anyway. But the parts simply wouldn't go together. Well, that is super annoying because my new clutch release bearing doesn't fit the clutch fork. and I'm pretty sure that this isn't an RS one, because I'm sure that they've got a bigger diameter on the inside, and this is the right fit for this bit of the gearbox. So that can only mean that maybe this gearbox isn't a Mk2 Escort 1300 gearbox. I don't know if any of you guys can identify it by looking at it. I'll give you a walk around it. So yeah, do let us know in the comments if this isn't a Mk2 Escort gearbox, or is this the wrong clutch fork, or is that bearing wrong? I'm pretty sure it's the right bearing. I'll have to check later on when I get home. I'm pretty sure I ordered the right one. But yeah, that's annoying. Can't fit the gearbox today. And because I had a tidy up yesterday, I threw the old bearing in the rubbish bag, and I've got rid of the rubbish bags. So there's no choice to use the old bearing either. Dear oh dear. Kind of annoying that I realised after I jacked Heidi up. But I do have one bit of good news. I just so happen to have some brand new bolts for the gearbox when I do eventually get around to fitting it. These were actually fitted to Esther, my Mk1 Escort, years ago when she had a Type 9, the Type 9 that's in Maud actually, and we were still using the original mounts on the tunnel. It seems like Ford didn't change the thread of those mounts. That's them there, when they switched to Mark II. So I'm guessing on a Mark II, these are still Imperial. Yep, good job. I kept those all these years. And the only reason I thought they might be the right ones is because I actually labelled the bag. Very unlike me to be so organised, but yep, happy days. And whilst Heidi is jacked up, I suppose I may as well see if I am going to be able to get this dust cover on with the flywheel already fitted. Don't actually know which side the start motor is on a crossflow, but I don't think this is going to fit anyway. No, it's not that way. Starter motor's on the passenger side. Like that. But what I can see now is that this bracket's wrong. Then this should line up. That is more like it. There you go. Lines up perfectly. Quality. Take this off for now. Make sure these are tight. And now we'll get Heidi back on the ground. All right, one last job I may as well deal with now is putting a nut on the back of that stud. With Heidi's passenger side jacked up, I unbolted the top mount from the inner wing, jacked her up a little bit more, and I was able to push the front leg down and carefully leave it leaning out of the way. Then I put a new nut on the stud for the washer bottle bracket, and then I carefully put everything back together, making sure I didn't damage my freshly painted top mount, and then I could get Heidi back on the ground. All right, glad that I managed to sort that out. Probably would have forgotten about it otherwise. And another thing, actually, that I'm glad about, which I haven't shown you in this video yet, is that for the first time since I've owned this car, the boot now shuts. I know, little things please little minds. Got the boot catch zinc plated that Gary Ball sent me, and it matches the zinc plated striker in there as well. Yeah, at least now I can keep some of the dust out of the boot by keeping it shut. All right, it's about time that I got out of here, so I need to tidy up. But before I do that, I'm going to cut that strap off of Heidi's engine and admire my work for a couple of minutes. They're blunt. All right, so there you go. Heidi's engine is installed, which I'm really happy about. Bit of a shame about her gearbox, but these things happen, and I'll get to the bottom of it and get a gearbox fitted to her very soon. And realistically, with a crossflow engine being so simple, I'll probably be able to get this thing running relatively soon. I've only got to check a couple of wires, throw a battery on it, throw some oil in it. We can hook up a jerry can to the mechanical fuel pump, and yeah, hear the thing run for the first time, although there's still a lot of work to do on the car before it'll actually be on the road. I'm very much looking forward to getting the manifolds back from Microblast Services, because then we can get the engine looking way more complete than it is now. So that might be the next video, but I do have quite a few things that I want to do on Esther, my Mark 1 Escort, so I'm probably going to make a video based on her pretty soon. And I've got some plans for Maud, my other model Mark 2 Escort. So yep, loads of stuff to do, but I like to keep busy. And whatever I do get up to next, you'll be able to see in the next video, which will probably be up on YouTube in the next few days. Until then, massive thanks to everyone who's tuned in. Do subscribe to the channel if you're new. Give this video a share on your social media if you thought it was any good. Special thanks to my patrons for your ongoing support. I will leave all the links to everything in the description as usual. But other than that, I'll chat to you next time.